Hello and welcome to the Stormont Sources podcast, where we take you inside politics at Stormont and inside policymaking for Northern Ireland. I'm David McCann, and also on the podcast are Tim Kearns, who is former Special Advisor to First Minister Peter Robinson and former Head of Policy for the DUP. Hello, Tim.
Hi, David.
And we also have Michael McKernan, who's a former Special Advisor to the SDLP. He's worked in the executive from 2007 to 2016. Hello, Michael.
Hiya, David. Hiya, Tim.
Okay. On the podcast today, we are discussing the recent LucidTalk poll in the Belfast Telegraph, which shows the TUV in third place, overtaking the Ulster Unionists and within just a few points of the DUP. How will this shape the next few months in Northern Ireland politics? Then we discuss the revelations this week reported by the BBC that fewer than half of requests to visit the former Maze prison site since Stormont was restored in February of 2024 have been approved. With this site languishing now for over a decade, we're asking what went wrong and will it ever be resolved? Then, the former Scottish First Minister Nicola Sturgeon's memoirs have been making waves over the past week, but we are focusing on some of her insights about the relationship she had with Martin McGuinness and Arlene Foster during her time in office. Tim, Michael and myself will be sharing our reflections on that period. All that coming up on this episode of Stormont Sources. You can watch the conversation on YouTube. Search for Stormont Sources, where we upload clips and full episodes for you to enjoy. Head to YouTube, subscribe to our channel there for videos and updates. You can follow us on X, watch clips on TikTok and Instagram, and subscribe to our mailing list at stormontsources.com. You can also leave us a review on your podcast app, although remember, if it's anything less than 4 stars, please don't bother. You can also WhatsApp us, 0333 404 6507. Remember to use the word Stormont. And you can also email us, hello@stormontsources.com. We know many of you are WhatsApping us and sending us emails. We will be getting to you in a future episode, so please do keep them coming in. Okay, on to our first topic. Another LucidTalk poll was published in the Belfast Telegraph this week. The results of it will make great reading for Sinn Féin, the TUV and the SDLP, with worrying signs for the DUP, UUP and Alliance parties. The poll has Sinn Féin continuing their lead with 26% of the vote. The DUP are on 17%. The TUV, who are the story of the poll, are third on 13%. Alliance are on 12%, with the SDLP and the UUP on 11% each. Popular leader, with Naomi Long now the least popular. Now, for context, it is important to note that it's about 21 months before we go to the polls, but still these midterm surveys are interesting, so let's break this down. Tim, are the TUV on a roll?
Well, they're certainly on a roll in terms of these mid-term polls. We've seen this consistently. I mean, this was a mid-term poll that really started to unravel for Arlene Foster when people started to get nervous about the TUV surge and what that was going to mean for DUP seats coming into an assembly election in 2022. And that's really what we saw being problematic for Arlene. And I think, again, we're seeing in these midterm polls, the TUV are polling very strongly. So it's a case of, can the TUV hold this sort of 13, 14%, or do they reduce back to the 6, 7%, 7.5% that they got at the last assembly election? You know, can the DUP claw back 4 or 5% from the TUV and leave the TUV sort of languishing in single figures again? That's the big unknown that we have at the moment. Now, if you're in the TUV, I think you look at this polling and you say, this is great. For us, this is certainly showing we're connecting with the people. Our single message on the protocol is having cut through with people. Unionists are supporting what we're saying. If you're in the DUP, you would say, look, we've been here before. This is a midterm poll. You know, when things start to narrow towards the election, we'll be able to draw things back. Because look, this is what we saw in 2001 as well. And so as we get into the early part of 2027, we'll see those figures come back. And when it comes to May, we'll come back as you were, 21%, 22%, and be able to retain our seats. Look, you know, who knows? The only way you're going to know who's right in that, whether the TUV are right or whether the DUP are right, is whenever we get to the polls in May and we see how people cast their vote. I would be nervous if I was in the DUP, because you cannot keep repeating this type of polling data and just hope that the electorate are going to move back. At some point in time, they don't. move back. And I think if the TUV can get some credible candidates, get some more credible candidates, I think that's going to be to their advantage. Timothy Gaston, I think, has been a real shot in the arm for the TUV because everybody said, Jim Allister, one-man band, somebody comes in to replace him, it's over, it's dead. That is not the case. We can see the TUV of other people who are competent.
Michael, on the TUV kind of surge, for want of a better term, I mean, it is important to remember the TUV didn't have a bad vote share at the last Assembly election, 7.6%. They weren't too far behind the SDLP, actually, who were on 9%.
And they were...
But they didn't get any, but they didn't elect anyone else because they're so transfer unfriendly.
But they were close, even at that, in one or two instances. Strangford, I think they were very close. Mm-hmm. The two big findings of this poll are the TUV taking votes of the DUP, and then a bit of a fall in the Alliance support and Naomi's personal support. Those are the two takeaways. The TUV one, I would be less concerned if I was the DUP than maybe Tim's suggesting, in that this poll's taken in the marching season in the summer when people are hearing things from platforms about the sellout across the Irish Sea border and all of that. And probably that has given TUV a fillip at the expense of the DUP. But one of the other things that came out in the opinion poll was that unionists, or a lot of unionists, yearn for greater unionist unity. And I think when it comes to election time, even if your heart is with TUV, you will vote DUP if you think that's the only way of keeping the nationalists out. And certainly in Westminster, tactical voting. So I think TUV will not damage the DUP in Westminster. When it comes to Assembly, I could see them pick up a couple of seats at the expense of the DUP. But I think yet again, people will say, there are only two parties who can be First Minister, Deputy First Minister, and that's the DUP and Sinn Féin. And whether unionists like it or not, they will find themselves having to coalesce around the DUP. And I would echo Tim's point. I think Timothy Gaston has done really well. There's more than Jim Allister in this party. And he has surged, I think, ever since his appearance on Stormont Sources. So that's where we are with that.
Well, we won't. We won't take massive amounts of credit for that. But Tim, Gavin has now been DUP leader now for 16 months, and is it a leadership problem or a brand problem that the DUP have? Because if what Michael's just said there is true, and they lose a couple of seats, I mean, the DUP coming back with 20 MLAs, I mean, that's back to where they were in 1998.
Well, talking about 1998, actually, it's interesting because, of course, we have a precedent for a fringe party in unionism that cuts through with the UK Unionist Party. I mean, they won 5 seats in 1998. Before anybody says, oh, they're just picking up the 6th seat in constituencies, they weren't. I mean, Bob won the 1st seat, Paddy Roach won the 5th seat, Norman Boyd won the 3rd seat, and Roger Hutchison won the 5th seat. The only person who didn't win in the first 5 seats for UK Unionists was Cedric Wilson in Strangford. He took the 6th seat. And obviously as well, we also had 3% of the vote went to a United Unionist faction who were just disillusioned Ulster Unionists, who picked up 3 seats with 3% of the vote. So with about 9.5% of the vote, we see that, there was 9 seats were heading to this kind of fringe unionist movement in 1998. So I think 1998 is a lesson for the DUP because they lost out in seats in 1998, particularly in East Antrim and South Antrim, that they could have picked up were and Lagan Valley as well, were the United Kingdom Unionist Party and also the United Unionist movement at that time were picking up seats the DUP could have felt they could have won. So are we going to see something like that in the next election? I don't know, but there is precedent for this, and there is people are saying, look, the TUV even on 13% are only going to pick up 2 or 3 seats. That's not what history tells us. History tells us that it could be very different. Now, coming to Gavin, when Gavin was on our podcast, Gavin said he's dealing with internal structures and he's going to start to look forward-facing in September. There's a couple of things I would say. Gavin is clearly a very popular leader within his party. And Gavin's actually a popular leader, much more popular than I think than this poll shows. I mean, Gavin's sitting at 52% approval rating in unionism. Now, anything over 50% is good within your community. And I think, Gavin's sitting there at 52%. But if you speak to Ulster Unionists, I've spoken to a few, and I'd say to them, what if Gavin was your next leader? You would be happy with that? And they say, oh, yes, I'd be very happy with Gavin as leader. And you say, well, Gavin can be your leader. And they sort of think that I'm alleging Gavin might move to the Ulster Unionist Party. And I've said, no, you could move to the Ulster Unionist Party and Gavin could be your leader, because there's nobody within your own party, within the Ulster Unionist Party, who's going to be leader. Gavin could be your leader. And any Ulster Unionist I've spoken to is by and large happy with Gavin as the leader of unionism. And also within the DUP, anybody who complains or dissents about the party, once you say, well, what about Gavin? They'll say, Gavin's very we love Gavin. Gavin's perfect for leader. So I think Gavin's got something that's beyond the brand of the DUP. I think where we're at, right? In this LucidTalk poll,
Jim. We often talk about the Matthew O'Toole problem, though. It's not
that's
coming
what I was
through
going to say.
Yeah.
But there's two things that Gavin needs to do. There's two things he needs to do. One, he needs to declare early that he's going to run for the Assembly in 2027. He needs to be leading from the Assembly, because secondly, Gavin's not being utilised in the press by the DUP in the way he should be. Gavin is by far the DUP's best media performer. There's no question of that. He's by far the best unionist performer. Well, it's really between him and Jim Allister, but they offer very different things in the media. Gavin has an appeal that could be beyond the party if Gavin was unleashed to be Gavin. And unfortunately, that hasn't happened yet. But I think within Gavin's strategy, he wants to settle things internally before he starts to look externally. I think he needs to say, I'm running for the Assembly in 2027. And he then needs to take the lead and move forward and be the leader. And I think that's how the DUP turn it around. Yeah. I think people will start to swing back to the DUP once they see Gavin more active on the front foot as the leader of unionism. I mean, unionists want unionist unity, and I think where we're headed, it's not going to happen. So I say this as hypothetical. What really needs to happen is the Ulster Unionist Party and the DUP need to merge and become a new party, the Democratic Party or whatever you want to call it, and the TUV then needs to be another party. So I think if Ulster Unionists want to do something to benefit the union, they would merge with the DUP and they'd put ego aside and do that, because they don't have anybody who can be leader and who can lead the party after Mike Nesbitt. Gavin is the person who's best placed to be that more reasonable voice of unionism, to really take that front foot for unionism. So I think the UUP, you need to merge, and I think unionism will be in a much better place.
But then, Michael, I suppose one of the issues that comes forward for Gavin is one that creates a by-election in East Belfast, and I'm not sure that the DUP would be eager to have that, just because by-elections just become unwieldy. You can think they're the safest seats, but then they just become very unwieldy. And then obviously the other issue is that, I'm sure David Brooks, the sitting DUP MLA there, who would likely have to stand aside, and Emma Pengelly probably just fell off their chairs, because they would be the people who would be given up the most in terms of positions if Gavin did come back.
Well, yeah, I think Tim has certainly secured his Christmas card from Gavin this year, if not a lot more, with that incredible...
He sends me a Christmas card every year, Michael.
Incredible endorsement.
I think someone wants to come back.
I thought for a moment he was talking about Claire Hanna, but anyway, that's another subject.
We'll come to this, Michael. We'll come to Claire.
The TUV, the bottom line is the TUV are having a nice little season where they're giving the DUP a bit of their own medicine. They're calling out the Lundys in the DUP, and for years the DUP called out the Lundys in the Ulster Unionist Party. That's an interesting idea, Tim, that they would merge. It's not that crazy an idea, because the Ulster Unionists have tried and tried to show how they're different, and they've elected liberal-leaning leaders. But they're liberal-leaning leaders of a party that doesn't want to be liberal. So it might as well throw its lot in with the DUP, who have kind of moved a wee bit away from their hard line generally. So the two could merge.
And then when we talk about, because obviously the other issue within it is the Ulster Unionist Party just falling into third. And for anyone who's an international listener, the idea of the Ulster Unionist Party being third in unionism has just been for the birds. You've never even considered that being a possibility, but yet polls are showing the TUV and the Ulster Unionist Party neck and neck. Surely this poll, Tim, and I'll go to this, surely this brings forward Mike Nesbitt's departure as Ulster. I mean, they can't let him hang on until January. The Ulster Unionist Conference is coming up in a couple of weeks. They can't wait until January for Mike to make a decision now, surely.
Well, Mike needs to make a decision either way. I mean, we've already touched on this.
But he can't wait until January either.
No. Well, look, the Ulster Unionist Party are sitting at 11%. They're 11% in the last Assembly election. I mean, the dial hasn't moved. If you're going to vote Ulster Unionist, that's baked in now. And I like, it's not going to happen. The DUP and the UUP are not going to merge. It is simply not going to happen because of personalities, because of people in constituency associations who just will not do it. They are where they are. They're in the position that they're in, and that matters more to them than the unionist vote. And that sadly is just the reality of people on the ground in some particularly rural areas of Northern Ireland. But there is no doubt, it is without a shadow of a doubt, what would be the best thing for unionism is for the UUP and the DUP to merge, Gavin to be the leader of the DUP, and then in time for the TUV, the DUP and the UUP to have a pact or a single party that runs for Westminster elections. I mean, this isn't radical thought. This isn't anything that should surprise anybody.
No, but it's the same.
This is what should happen, but people will not do it. They will not give up their position.
Because Tim, there was once upon a time, there was broadly a single unionist party, and it was a disaster. It could never make a decision that was coherent because you're trying to balance too many different ways. I mean, what about the Liberals in the Ulster Unionist Party? Where do they go? They're not going to just go into the DUP.
Well, the reality is, if there's a merger between the DUP and the UUP, then I think there are people within the DUP who would probably move towards the TUV. Some, I don't think many would, and there are people, I think, undoubtedly, who are UUP who would gravitate towards the Alliance Party. But I think you would see a unionist party then that would emerge with about 28% of the vote, somewhere in around there. And I think that would be a vote that's locked down for a generation, provided there's not any dropping of the ball. That unionist bloc would be in the same position as the Sinn Féin bloc is right now. Pretty solid there for the next 2 or 3 elections, barring major disaster. And, moving forward with a reasonably popular leader in Michelle O'Neill on the Republican side and a popular leader on the Unionist side being Gavin Robinson. And I think we would see a First and Deputy First Minister who would be locked down for at least half a generation there. And I think that would give stability on the Unionist side and the National side. But it's not going to happen. We're talking pie in the sky. It's simply not going to happen because personalities won't let it happen. But it should happen. I would say it must happen, but sadly it won't.
Well, the Ulster Unionist Party, I mean, if Mike does depart, it seems like he wants to. I'm not sure who they even get.
They have no leader. They have literally no leader.
I really don't know. I honestly do not know who leads the Ulster Unionist Party at this stage. And
I've spoken to a number of Ulster Unionists, David, and I've said to them, you'd like Gavin as your next leader, and they all say yes. Everybody, without no one who I've spoken to, grassroots or at a more senior level within the Ulster Unionist Party, has said we would not accept Gavin as leader. Now, where are you going to go? Move towards the DUP? I mean, there are some policy gulfs between them. There's no doubt about that. But I think they're very easily bridged. And I think for the betterment of unionism, it would be better they move together, but it simply won't happen.
Well, outside of unionism, the poll also has some other interesting findings. And Michael, I'm going to go to you here. You must be a happy guy. Claire Hanna, the current SDLP leader, is the most popular leader in Northern Ireland. Another poll has the SDLP above 10%. Some LucidTalk polls have had them down as low as 6%. So there is some sign of recovery there. And also they're just 1 point behind the Alliance Party. Naomi Long's personal ratings have fallen now. She's now the least popular leader. So that's going to be key because the SDLP need to not just win votes back from Sinn Féin, but they need to win back the votes in recent years that they've lost to the Alliance Party. So this must be some good news for the SDLP. No, or are we overlooking it?
Yeah, I think a little bit of alliance is coming back to the SDLP on the national side. On the earlier conversation there about unionism, the reason the two parties can merge now is because Liberal leaders have tried to lead the Ulster Unionist Party in a Liberal direction. The party doesn't want it, and Liberal Unionists are now to be found in the Alliance Party more than in the Ulster Unionist Party. Back to Claire. Claire is top in the polls here, and I think that's more just a function of her personality. She's bright and engaging, and while she knows what she thinks on every issue, she still comes across as open-minded and quite refreshing in a politician. So I think her person qualities are coming to the fore. It's not quite cutting through for the party itself, although the party, you could say now, has recovered a little bit and has stabilised after a long, long, painful decline. So that's probably good news as well for the SDLP. But I think, and this is where it's intriguing with the TUV, I think the tipping point in the Assembly election is somewhere around about 14%, where you get a breakthrough, you start picking up in most constituencies.
Yeah.
At 11, you're not there.
Yeah.
At 17, as the Alliance did in the last Assembly election, it cleaned up in seats. So in those low teens is where the tipping point is, where you translate votes into seats. And the SDLP, if they can add another couple of percent, having stabilised, then they could have a very good Assembly election 2027 and actually recover lost ground. However, they suffer from the same strategic malaise as the Ulster Unionist Party in that they have no visible strategy to take up the leadership of nationalism or the leadership of unionism. Again, they're now referred to, and don't object to being referred to, as the smaller parties, and there's two big parties. And in our system, there's only two prizes, and that's first and deputy first. And if you're not in that race, then you're not really going anywhere.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things I think that needs to happen first with the SDLP's recovery is I do think they need to figure out the alliance. Now, Claire has done that in South Belfast at Westminster level. She has been proven that she can hold off the Alliance Party and also take votes away from them. But can she translate that across Northern? Because one of Naomi Long's strengths has been she's been able to translate her own personal popularity into gains for the Alliance Party across Northern Ireland. But one of the interesting things, and I'll give Tim a chance to talk about this, is, I mean, we've been talking about the Alliance surge Mark 1 being over for a while, and these polls just seem to continue to confirm that. I mean, are we maybe just overcooking this a wee bit? Because there are people I speak to in the Alliance Party who kind of say there's a ceiling for every party. Every party hits it. Sinn Féin have hit theirs about now. The DUP hit theirs back in 2016. We've just hit ours. And that's all that's happening here. We're still trading in the same real estate.
No. Yeah, I mean, Michael said the Alliance hit 17% in the 2022 Assembly election. I think it was 17 seats, 13.5% of the vote.
Right.
So they're sitting on 12% of the vote in this poll. So I think, within the margin of error, the poll's coming out and saying, well, what you got in 2022 is about what you're going to get now. Now, if there's a little dip in the vote, is there going to be some of those seats in North Antrim? Is that likely now very much under pressure? Because a little bit of a dip in the Alliance vote does put some of those seats under a little bit of pressure. I think Upper Bann, Owen Tennyson is under a bit of pressure, and South Down as well. I think that there's some pressure on Alliance and Alliance's position. So a little dip in the vote could cost Alliance a lot, but I think Alliance will be buoyed by saying, look, we're about what we got before. The one thing in Naomi Long's figures that's interesting is the collapse actually within the Unionist electorate down to 17%.
Yeah.
And that's why she is no longer the popular leader, the most popular leader in Northern Ireland. Her poll ratings within Unionism have collapsed. That to me would be a worry, because that's where the Alliance surge has really taken root, is within broadly Unionist constituencies to the east of the Bann. That the Alliance Party have not really made inroads west of the Bann. So she's sitting with an approval rating of 51% within nationalism. And anything over 50% is good. Anything under 40% is not good. She's sitting at 17 with Unionists. That would be very concerning to me if I was somebody in the Alliance Party reading these figures. What has happened to Naomi Long with Unionists? Why is she failing to connect with them in a way that she was succeeding to connect in the past? And we've talked about this before. I think it's because Naomi is not as visible anymore. But I also think she hasn't really followed through, I think, with some of the things that she said she was going to do and going to achieve. I also think in terms of some of her protocol rhetoric, siding with nationalism, republicanism, like she would say she didn't do that, but I think there's a perception within unionism that that's where she has placed her allegiance. Now, that may be wrong. An Alliance, if they were on here, would say that was wrong, and that's not the case. But that's the perception.
Cared about the protocol,
unionists.
You're not going to be back in Alliance, and Alliance have surged all the way through.
But approval ratings, but approval ratings are not, would I vote for you? Approval ratings are, do I like the cut of your jib? Are you okay? Are you a decent politician? It's not. You're confusing that with voting intention.
If you were upset with Naomi over the protocol, you were upset with her over the flags vote. Yeah, I just think those two things are all just.
Well, then you explain to me why she's tanked within unionism.
Well, I think, but Tim, the unionists that I think are annoyed with her.
No. Why has she tanked?
Right. I think first of all, there are a couple of things that have gone on. I think apart from Sinn Féin, all the executive parties are down. Right. The Assembly, the executive itself has a 35% approval rating, right, which is down 3 points. Right. So I do think there is a frustration with the executive parties. Again, Sinn Féin are the only party that's been insulated from that. So that's the first thing I would say. The second thing I would say, in terms of alliances, that there's also, I think, a longevity issue. We forget Naomi is now, I think, the longest serving leader of the main party. She became leader 9 years ago. She's going to be 10 years next October as leader of the Alliance Party. And people get fed up with you after a while. People do get fed up with leaders there, and I think we're starting to see that. However, though, people will talk about the post-Naomi Long Alliance Party. I mean, we spoke about this as well. The fact that Saoirse Eastwood was even asked about would she run for the leadership, I think it does show that there is some discussion. I don't think we're at leadership challenge territory, nowhere near it yet, about what does the Alliance Party look like post-Naomi Long. And I think that is what we're seeing signs
but you've
of.
Done everything but answer my question there, David.
Also, no.
Why is she still 51% with nationalists, which is good, but 17% with unionists, which is bad? So explain the unionist drop.
Tim, I also can point out another figure to you. Claire Hanna is more popular with Green and Alliance voters at the moment than Naomi Long is. Her biggest drop was not with unionists in the poll in her personal ratings. It was with that block of voters. That was her biggest drop, was with them. So her dial within unionism hasn't actually moved that much. And again, Tim, I just go back to what I was saying before. The unionists that I think that express hostile views about Naomi Long have been doing it for the past 15 years. That's all I'm saying. It's all priced in.
But I think that the drop within unionism has been dramatic. I think over the last 3 or 4 polls from LucidTalk, and to be down at 17% amongst unionism, there's something more than just, this is flag protests going back 10 years. And it's something actually, I think, deeper even than the protocol. I think Naomi Long is seen within the unionist community as someone who promised but didn't deliver.
Yeah. Well, this goes on, Michael. I'll come to you on this. The one party that is insulated from all of this is Sinn Féin. Sinn Féin. Yeah. Michelle O'Neill's got decent approval ratings. She's got very good approval ratings, actually. I think she's the second most popular leader. And 26% midterm, considering the fact they average around 27 to 28%. So back to Tim's point about margin of error, they haven't budged, and they are would clearly be returned as the largest party and clearly dominant within nationalism. But they cannot be moved.
Yes, and I think Sinn Féin, by its nature and given its background in history, has a slightly different kind of voter, a more loyal voter in the sense of like a football fan. You're with them through thick and thin. So when they do well, you're pleased. When they don't do well, you're not so pleased, but you're still with them. And the SDLP's biggest challenge is to try and undermine that ongoing loyalty that Sinn Féin voters have through thick and thin. And it wouldn't matter in some cases what kind of candidate they put up, what kind of policies they announced. They've got caught out a couple of times in the south, but in the north, they have just a solid bedrock of support that is not going anywhere.
Okay.
Claire, Michelle O'Neill is still the most popular leader within nationalism and republicanism. Claire Hanna is not that at 68 to 65. So Michelle O'Neill, whatever you say about Claire Hanna being popular, she's not the most popular with the people who matter in terms of the elections she's going to try and fight.
And Mike Nesbitt's got the opposite. Mike Nesbitt's got a decent rating, but that's because of nationalists. Actually, he's actually and none of them are going to vote for the Ulster Unionist Party,
Mike Nesbitt sent out 43% approval. 44 with nationalists, 35 with unionists, and 43 with other.
Maybe it's because they think he's quitting.
Maybe that is.
They approve of that.
People do get. Arlene Foster, I think, had an uptick in her support as she was going out the door. Because again, people
I'm surprised that Mike is the 35 with the unionists. That did surprise me in the poll. That's probably the most surprising thing, because I don't speak to unionists who particularly dislike Mike Nesbitt. I don't speak to anybody who thinks that Mike Nesbitt is a particularly bad leader. So I was quite surprised when just doing a deep dive into these figures that Mike just hasn't had that cut through in unionism, because it's not what people are saying on the ground.
Yeah, all right. Well, it is.
He's having to compete with Emma and the incredible Gavin Robinson.
Well, maybe, of course, this poll was done a month after he said his indecision about whether he was standing or not. Maybe that's what's factored into this and baked into this.
Okay.
And I think for Emma, we need to say, this poll came at a very bad time for her. There's a lot of very negative press for her, and particularly in the Irish news, who ran 5 days about her eating strawberries at Wimbledon, which did seem ridiculous in the midst of silly season. So, it came out at a bad time for her with what was a ridiculous attack, because a lot of journalists had nothing else to write about.
God, he really is making the audition to be a spat again. Well, sure, I'm sure Education Minister Pengelly will bring you in, and if that doesn't work, you can go to Deputy First Minister Robinson. Anyway, we'll move on to our next topic. So the issue of the Maze prison site still rumbles on. So for those who maybe are not aware or are international listeners, the Maze prison was where some of the most famous prisoners were actually housed during the Troubles. So the site evokes memories of key moments such as the hunger strikes in the early 1990s. The site near Lisburn has been in limbo for more than a decade due to a political standoff that stalled a more than £300 million regeneration plan. The high security jail has been closed since the year 2000. Some of the buildings have been demolished, some have been retained. In 2013, Stormont's First Minister and the DUP leader, someone who Tim worked for, Peter Robinson, blocked the plan to build a peace centre. This has been referred to as the infamous letter from America. Now the BBC are reporting, Brendan Hughes over there has been reporting that the First and Deputy First Ministers have approved fewer than half of the requests to visit the former Maze prison site since Stormont was restored in February of 2024. Michael, I know you were in the executive at the time when this plan was stalled. This is still a real shambles. So what went wrong?
Even better, I have history in this. I co-chaired the original Maze panel along with the Ulster Unionist Party's David Campbell, and our membership included Edwin Poots representing the DUP and Martin O'Muller representing Sinn Féin. And we reached agreement. We actually reached agreement. That's where the whole peace centre thing came from. And why that? I mean, the elephant in the room, the real difficulty among the very divided parties was the fact that the preserved buildings, which were done just by the normal authorities listing buildings, but they included the prison hospital and the cell where Bobby Sands died, etc., etc. And that was politically a hot potato. And we thought, arrived at a solution that was honourable, that would make sure it was preserved, but it wouldn't become a Republican shrine. It would be part of an overall international peace centre and so on. So some years later, Peter Robinson, for other reasons, pulled the plug on it. But we don't need to go into Peter Robinson. That's all done and dusted. But today, the executive, 12 years after Peter Robinson pulled the plug with the letter from America, they're not letting people into the place, and they are making a nonsense of the quango that was set up to run the place. I think they even issued a statement saying they wondered, was there any point in their existence anymore? They themselves were saying that. But when you think about it, yes, the difficulty and the challenge of the prison hospital and the Bobby Sands cell and so on is still there and will still require resolution. But there is no reason why the DUP and Sinn Féin cannot agree to develop this site and draw some parameters around it that allow it to move on. It's an absolute disgrace. It's not a difficult thing to square. We did it in much more difficult and divided times than and they should be able to do it. Just for colour for our listeners, the prison hospital was listed, and the prison hospital is not like a hospital. It's another cell block with bars on the windows, and the only thing that's substantially different is the doorways are wider everywhere to allow beds to move around and to be wheeled about. I mean, where Bobby Sands was in the prison hospital, it was a cell. And I remember last time I was there, I managed to, because I was on the committee, I managed to organise a visit from a lot of my friends and associates in Lurgan under the guise of being a team of journalists, and they had great fun running up the watchtowers and looking around and seeing the potential of the site as well. The current body has been hung out to dry. They call themselves the Maze Long Kesh Regeneration Corporation. Corporation is a bit of a misnomer. Their turnover, their income last year was 100,000. They have 3 tenants: the Royal Ulster, the Balmoral Show, effectively, the Royal Ulster Agricultural Society, the Ulster Aviation people, who were already there before any of this started. They had a couple of big hangars on the fringe of the site, and they were already there before the body was set up. And the only other one is that they're locating the Northern Ireland Air Ambulance there. But we have a whole quango with a board and a senior executive team and all the rest of it to run nothing in particular. And there's no reason why this can't be agreed. And the whole stadium thing that was in the equation when I was dealing with it, that's gone. So it's simply a question of sensitive treatment of the prison hospital, the preserved cage, the preserved H block, and they need to get on with it and release the potential of the site.
Tim, what do you think? I mean, you were obviously there at the time whenever the kibosh was put on this, so...
Yeah, I mean, it's one of the few times where the DUP have been really under pressure. I mean, Mike Nesbitt, that was his first iteration as UUP leader. And it was probably the one time in the last 22 years, probably the only time in the last 22 years, the Ulster Unionist Party really laid a glove on the DUP. And there was significant cut through because, you know, there'd been some joint press conferences, I think, in the spring of 2013 where... you know, Michael's work was coming to an end and there was announcements about what the International Peace Centre was going to be. It was very clear. Everybody was at pains to say this was going to be a shrine to nothing. And then Mike Nesbitt had some cut through in terms of victims' organisations, and Jim Allister then jumped on the bandwagon, and it's probably the one time the Ulster Unionist Party have really made headway against the DUP, and Peter Robinson sent the letter that he sent, and it's stalled everything ever since. You know, we're 12 years on from that now, and still there's nothing happening at this site. I think we've got to say eventually something will be there. Eventually there will be some sort of heritage attraction. I don't know what the proper term would be, sort of something like the Crumlin Road Jail, where people can visit and can undertake tours of whatever's left on that site and whatever's then built on that site to explain whatever history at that point in time people want to explain. I think inevitably that's going to happen. So at some point between today and, you know, 50 years time, you know, that's going to happen. So I wonder, well, I'm setting it at wide parameters, Michael, because I don't know when it's going to happen. There's going to be no breakthrough in the next 6 months. So at some point in time, there's going to be something that's done at that site. Clearly, there is an issue for people who have suffered trauma in the Troubles. The site is a touchstone for them. And I think we shouldn't underplay, and I don't think we should underestimate the feeling of hurt and pain that they have. And I think if this is going to happen within the lifetime of people who have suffered and suffered at the hands of people who are in prison there on both sides of the divide, I think if we're going to do something before they pass away, I think we need to be sensitive to what their views are, and how could we do that in a way that honours their trauma. I mean, that's a bizarre phrase to use, but in some way respects their trauma. I think that's a better way of putting it, and allows something that can be historically accurate and almost like lead to what the original intention of the site was, where academics would come and we could do peace and reconciliation studies, and out of this awful mess, this awful set of circumstances for a number of years, something worthwhile for human thought and existence could flow forward. And I think that was the right plan that Michael's board put in place at the time. But I do think there is still that trauma, and I do think that we underplay that trauma at our peril, because there are people on both sides who have been traumatized by what's gone on, and I think we do still need to respect that. So I actually don't really know what the answer is. I'm waffling, and I realise I'm waffling.
You haven't really given any solutions to the...
The solution is to get together and agree to return to something like the original plan and take it forward. You mentioned the Crumlin Road. I mean, there are a lot of people, a lot of sensitivity and pain and all associated with the people who are in and out of that. But it's been dealt with without any bother.
I think the solution, Michael, is almost to immediately move to some sort of academic centre. And that's all we do. So we open an academic centre. That's phase one. We open an academic centre. We have very clear parameters around what's going to go on there, that it's jointly run by Queen's and the University of Ulster or whatever way we're going to do that, and we have very clear parameters of what academics will get grants to do in that centre. I think that's phase one. And then I think as you start to normalise
phase two is like a peace campus, so you move Cooperation Ireland and Children in Crossfire and this one and that one, all involved in peace building, peacemaking, move them all on site and make it a place of peace endeavour.
One of the issues
and that is ultimately the answer. But it's a 400-acre site, and it's brilliantly sited and brilliantly serviced. It's silly not to develop it because you're afraid of the sensitivity.
Well, we can minimise
Do we maybe need to break it because this has been suggested before? Do we maybe need to, instead of doing like one holistic thing for the entire site, is it not maybe better that we kind of break it down a wee bit and say, well, we'll develop this bit here, then okay, we'll maybe look at developing the other bit, but then we'll do this, we'll do that, instead of actually maybe we're looking at it to a holistic way is what's really holding it up. No,
because the elephant in the room is the prison hospital and Bobby Sands.
But the elephant in the room
that has to be dealt with. And it can only be dealt with if everybody's agreed on everything else as well.
That's not the elephant in the room. The elephant in the room is tours of the hospital block and the H block. So it's not their existence. So almost I feel we've got to say, look, that is controversial. Touring those sites is controversial. So let's park that.
But Tim, can I just come in there though? Just put my historian hat on. It's part of our history, though. We can't erase the troubles happen. The hunger strikes happen, though, Tim.
That's why we park that for now, and we say we'll come back to that.
No,
we'll park that. We'll come back to
with
that.
it. So face up to it and deal with it.
Well, look, I'm not a great proponent of really turn anywhere where there's these sort of gruesome things have happened. I don't understand why. We want to open these
because it was a major. Again, Tim, you don't have to agree, but it was a major historical event. The troubles happened.
But people go to the Crumb, people go to the peace walls and all of that. It's not my cup of tea, but that's what people do, and it doesn't cause any problems. In fact, if anything, there's an economic benefit from it.
You've got Kilmainham Jail in Dublin, for example. You've got Alcatraz out in San Francisco. It's not uncommon, though, that these things get.
It's not uncommon, but I do think that it is so controversial while people are still alive who are expressing they're traumatized that we move forward where they are still people who are active participants and valued people within our society. I think we would devalue them by not listening to them. So I think the first phase is
They were all consulted. First time round, they were all consulted, including the Prison Officers Association and the widows of prison officers and all the rest of it.
But in 2013, it became very clear that there were victims groups who felt that there was something within this that was traumatizing. Now, we have a job of work to do with them. So I think the first phase is we park tours of each block and we park tours of the hospital block. You go ahead with the academic element of the site and you start to normalize the site and attending the site and being at the site. And I think that's how you move things forward. That's the key to unlocking it. And with a view to revisiting very quickly after the Peace Building Centre is open, what's going to happen in terms of touring the H blocks and how that's going to focus. There's no other way that we're going to unlock this other than to do it that way.
Okay, I think it's, I don't know how you square those different things, because I mean, you talk about the academic side, Tim, but like a lot of academics will argue with you, we should be acknowledging things like the hunger strikes. We should be acknowledging, like, not celebrating, acknowledging that these things happened. And
nobody does. I don't think anybody doesn't acknowledge that they happened. I mean,
that's why the buildings were listed. It's part of our history, and we should be able to face up to it.
And I have no difficulty with them being listed. I have no difficulty with them being preserved.
And as Michael
none of those things.
Said, that there's loads of parts of the Troubles that we do have remnants to. Anyway, as and you don't have to celebrate them and agree with what happened.
I do think once you open it up to visiting, it will become a celebration. It will become some sort of, and I think. But I think for some other people, that would just re-traumatize them.
But you can do it in a manner that there's no celebration or triumphalism or anything like that on the site itself.
I mean, you have.
Well, you have a better optimism than I have that would happen.
Well, how could they, Tim? You would have an official tour guide. Official tour guides would be brought in, hired, and they would be giving the history of what happened. I mean, it wouldn't be. You wouldn't just
I admire your optimism, David. I admire your optimism, Michael. But we all three of us know that's not what's going to happen.
Well, that remains to be seen. But anyway, we should give Michelle and Emma a break because we've actually moved it no further forward in the last 15 minutes talking about it. But look, we'll move on.
The three of us have agreed to an academic peace centre. I mean, there you go. We have moved further on.
Well, that'll keep the crowds away, at least, for sure, an academic peace centre. So anyway, we'll move on to our next.
Might give you a wee job, so it would, David.
Might do, Tim. I don't know if they would hire me. I'm more history of the 50s and 60s. But anyway, now on to our third topic, Nicola Sturgeon's memoirs. And no, you haven't accidentally skipped onto Hollywood sources. You're still with us here on Stormont Sources. But if you want to hear more about this, you can check out Callum, Andy and Jeff's take on the former Scottish First Minister's new book over at the Hollywood Sources channel. Nicola Sturgeon was First Minister of Scotland from 2014 to 2023, and during that time, she dealt with various First Ministers and Deputy First Ministers from Northern Ireland, and she mentioned some of them in her new book called Frankly. She is praised for Martin McGuinness and also notes her difficulty with Arlene Foster. Now, she sums up basically her recollections of a British Irish Council meeting in 2016, and she notes basically the divergence really from Martin McGuinness's interactions with Ian Paisley and Peter Robinson, you know, and she was talking about kind of the warmth that there was between those two gentlemen and himself. But she noticed the lack of warmth between Arlene Foster and Martin McGuinness, and she noted that what she could describe as a simmering tension. And she also noted her own lack of ability to establish a rapport with Arlene Foster herself. So I'm going to go to you first, Tim, on this. What did you make of her insights and her difficulty to establish a relationship with Arlene, but her warm feelings toward Martin McGuinness?
I think we should say, first off, for the lawyers, Nicola Sturgeon wrote that a lot better than what you read it out. So just in case Nicola's annoyed with us, I think I would echo what Nicola Sturgeon said, really, because Martin McGuinness was a very warm man, and Arlene Foster could be prickly. The thing that really struck me when I first read these quotes in the newspaper was, the one thing that Nicola Sturgeon and Arlene Foster don't realise is pretty much the same person. Both of them probably not the most popular at school, got great A-levels, hires results, went to university, maybe the first, certainly for Arlene, probably for Nicola as well, the first in their family to go to university, studied law, became solicitors, rose to prominence rapidly through the party they were in because they were female solicitors who were promoted by people within the respective parties, rose to be First Minister, and are both very prickly, very spiky, and both think they're absolutely right about everything and everybody else is wrong. Nicola Sturgeon, Arlene Foster, basically two sides of the one coin. And I think both of them would probably bristle at that, but that's the reality. I mean, they pretty much are the same politician. And have had sort of the same kind of political trajectory. Although I think, and probably, in fairness to Arlene, she may have had her party go against her in the end. I think Nicola Sturgeon, in a lot more circumstances in life, go against her in the end. But I think they both find themselves in the very same position again today, struggling for relevance and trying to struggle for relevance through the media. Arlene Foster on GB News, struggling for relevance, and Nicola Sturgeon with this book, struggling for relevance. So I think they're political figures who have had a remarkably similar political career and find themselves today in a remarkably similar position.
Michael, what do you make of the kind of her relationships? I mean, she speaks incredibly warmly about Martin McGuinness.
I recognise what she's saying. Martin McGuinness was very affable. He was certainly very pleasant to me in my dealings with him. Less so to one or two of the ministers I worked for, and you could see occasionally the cold, hard stare of disapproval from Martin. But one example was, and we mentioned these British Irish councils, or BICs as we call them, and they're great. The governments of all of the different jurisdictions in these islands would meet together, and there'd be a host, and it would usually be in a nice castle somewhere with a nice dinner that evening. But one was unusually held in Cardiff in the Swailek Stadium, which was the stadium home of Glamorgan Cricket Club. And Martin McGuinness was able to regale all and sundry about his love of cricket, and he was quite knowledgeable on the subject, and the Welsh and the English were fascinated that this chap knew so much about their game. But Martin made a good effort to fit in everywhere. Just picking up some of Tim's things there, it is interesting the parallels in the two ladies' careers, but I have to say I would have a little bit more sympathy for both of them. Both of them came to the top in a man's world, and I think the prickliness was more just a bit of defensiveness. They knew they had to look after themselves a wee bit more. I found Arlene, just in day-to-day dealings with her, I find that there's a charming and humorous side to Arlene once she's relaxed with you, once she's okay and you're not in battle. But when she goes into battle, then she can be a tough cookie and kind of an unpleasant side. And Nicola, I think, was a brilliant lieutenant to Alex Salmond throughout their partnership. And she was, as it happens in the cases of many partnerships, when they dissolve, both parties are then diminished by that dissolution. And that has happened to Nicola. And even though she governed on and became quite popular in her own right, she lost something without having Alex Salmond's support. And eventually overreached in government on pushing the second referendum, and the Scottish people just weren't ready for that. And then pushing the boat out a bit too far for the Scottish sensitivity on the trans issues and things like that. So they both came unstuck. But I think when they let their hair down, they could be quite engaging people.
I think one of the interesting things, just going back to something that Tim was saying there, I watched the 2016 SNP election broadcast, and I also watched the DUP one. Again, those elections were on the same day in 2016. We voted for the Assembly the same day Scotland voted for the Scottish Parliament. And Tim, you're right, mirror images. Nicola Sturgeon appears in the broadcast. If you want the SNP government with me as First Minister, vote both votes SNP, and look at the Northern Ireland one is, if you want me as First Minister, vote for my DUP candidates. And, you know, it's odd. The two of them absolutely dominated.
The branding was very much that way in 2016 for both parties. It was Nicola's party, who was seen as a bit softer than Alex Salmond. It was Arlene's party, seen as a bit softer than Peter Robinson. And the women were in charge and very much leaning into that. And both of them, almost immediately after 2016, became prickly, became aloof, became detached, became wedded to their positions. They were right. Everyone else was wrong. And for both of them, it was their own doing.
Although we should say, as Nicola Sturgeon would point out, she, I think, fought 8 or 9 elections and won every single one of them.
Yeah, I mean, she's had a brilliant career, and she overreached on the trans issues, and that finally.
I don't think Arlene lost an election either.
I think things though. I think the difference between them is that within a year, Arlene Foster's bad luck started, and she never recovered from the 2017 Assembly election result, really. Whereas Nicola did have setbacks, and she had a setback in the general election of 2017. Remember, the SNP went backwards, still got the most seats, but went backwards. But then she was able to regain the initiative for 2021, and then in the 2019 general
And both parties have really sort of struggled in the aftermath.
Yeah, they have.
I think we're saying both parties are being settled now by much steadier hands in Gavin and John Swinney.
Exactly, John Swinney and Gavin. I think there's parallels between those two leaders.
Not in age.
Not in age, but in terms of temperament, in terms of their roles.
In terms of temperament, but popularity beyond.
They both came in crisis situations, and they both came in. And again, that is a fascinating topic, which we do need to get into.
I'm playing Nicola's book in the car, and I skipped to the chapter that dealt with Martin McGuinness and all these people. But I'm really looking forward to getting towards the end of the book to see what actually went on, or what she says about what actually went on. And I know that there were inquiries into SNP finances, and she has been completely exonerated in relation to any suggestions around that. But nonetheless, I wonder, does she, towards the end of the book, describe a situation where she arrives home from work and says, "My goodness, what's this £110,000 motorhome doing in my driveway?"
Well,
I don't know.
Good luck to you, Michael.
Nolan didn't ask her that.
Good luck to you, Michael, because the excerpts I've read in the national press have been so dull that I don't want to read any more of it.
Well, I listen to these books in the car.
Well, we'll see. But again, if you want to take a look at what some Scottish perspectives are, just again, you can go and listen to the Hollywood Sources podcast, where again, Jeff, Callum and Andy, over 2 episodes, go through the book and give their perspectives on what they liked and what they disliked about it as well. Gents, thanks very much for going around the houses with me again this week. Just to remind you, if you want to get in touch with us about anything that you're listening to, please do send us a question or comment. We do read them all. In WhatsApp us 333-404-6507. Use the word Stormont so you know it's for this podcast. Remember, hello@stormontsources.com if you want to use an email. That's all we have time for this edition of Stormont Sources. Thank you for listening in. Please keep in touch for your questions, comments and ideas. That's all from Tim, Michael and myself. We'll see you next week. 50